Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome to Student Ministry Matters. My name is Dan Carson, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's conversation about student ministry. Now, in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a challenging subject. If you're leading a student ministry in your local church, you're probably not the lead pastor. Your role is different. You may have the best and easiest pastor in the world to work with. However, that isn't always the case. So how do we honor God in the best and biggest way in our ministry? Well, we figure out how to work with the pastor God has placed us with. Chris Vines and Micah Powell are with me again today. Tell me something good that's happened in your lives today.
This week, I got Monday off. That was great. Got to rest and enjoy my family.
That's awesome, man.
Monday was, how did that happen?
It was President's Day.
Okay.
Don't you celebrate President's Day?
No, we do not.
I'm not a president,
We still have
so
more.
I don't get to take it off. I'm just kidding.
Well,
You're the president of my
How about you,
world,
Micah?
I'm just kidding, man. Man, I got the opportunity to get a new vehicle this week, and so I'm
Nice.
that's every time something like that happens. I guess it's a new used vehicle, so I'm very excited. It's gonna be better gas mileage, and better for the environment. That's how that is. It's it's really important to me. So.
Well, that's awesome. I know this past week I got to celebrate Valentine's Day with my wife. We went out for breakfast, which was different, at a tea house. So don't hold that against me. Well, before we get to our topic, it's time for the random question of the week. And each week we'll be answering a question to help you guys get to know us better. And as a reminder, if you have a question for us, send that to info@studentministrymatters.com. And this week I'm going to ask a pretty nerdy question. But again, look at the source. If you could be a superhero, who would you be and why? Let's start with you, Micah.
Captain America. He's classy. He's a gentleman. He says language at one point in one of the movies,
Yes,
I believe.
love it.
And Iron Man's like, I'm sorry, we're just going to ignore that Cap just said language? He's my dude. I mean, he's awesome, very inclusive. And he's like the Jesus-esque guy of all of Marvel, pretty much, to me.
Yeah.
Love him.
How about you, Chris?
man, I'm a Superman fan. I've always loved Superman, mainly because of the tights.
Oh my goodness gracious, we went there.
He went there, yes. That and the underwear on the outside of his tights.
Yeah, that was always weird. Dean Cain was my favorite Superman.
Oh, yeah, man. I'm going to actually, in a few weeks, I'm headed to Dallas Fan Expo, and I'm going to get to meet Dean Cain. Pretty excited about that. So,
Really?
yeah,
Tell him I said hi.
I will. Well, I'm like you, Chris. You don't have to look far on my online presence or in my office to know who I'm going to pick. I love Superman. His power set is off the charts, but I've always identified with that nerdy guy who could somehow change into Superman. And so he always does the right thing. He's able to save the day. Well, let's get to our topic for the day because it's a harder one. Working with a lead pastor can be a difficult thing, whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer. So, guys, what are some reasons that relationship can be difficult? Chris, you got any ideas?
Yeah, I think one reason it can be difficult is just because of different personalities that clash. I think there's some personalities that are obviously different that mesh well together, but then there's some that just don't. So I think that's one reason. There may be a different ministry philosophy between the two of you, and that can cause some tension as well. I think one thing that as I was just thinking about this question was, it could be possible that when a youth pastor is hired on underneath a lead pastor, that a clear job description with clear expectations may not have been given, and so at that point, it's if there's not clear expectations, then that's just bad communication, and that can obviously cause some tension as well. So those are just some quick thoughts that I had.
Yeah, I think.
How about you, Micah?
I think some of those are. I mean, I have the same ones, but I think I would even more emphasize. I think there can be tension when a generational communication issue. Maybe I don't like maybe lack of communication, but maybe a little bit of a lack of understanding from every party. I mean, especially if you're a student pastor or minister and you're talking with the senior pastor that's several generations away from you, then the way that they spoke and their age group is very different than we speak in ours, and even younger than us. And the more generations there are away from between you, it makes it even harder to communicate. And so, which leads me kind of to my something I would add to that, Chris, which I think all your points are great. I would agree with all those, but I think some issues that can then pop up as well is not having enough time together. And that seems probably really small, but the relationship aspect, if you don't have a good relationship with each other, from student pastor to senior pastor, whatever the title is, lead discipler, you have to spend time together. You just have to. I mean, if you can understand each other, you can work out each other's philosophies and differences of opinion, and you can work out the communication. And so just really time spent together in the word and prayer. That I think that those are some reasons that it can be difficult when those things aren't being done. Prayer together, Bible study together, and challenging each other and having understanding towards each other, and that be an open line of communication. Like, hey, listen, you're different, I'm different, but hey, God wants to use both of us for His kingdom. So tell me some things. What do you think about this text, or what do you think about, and just kind of approach it that way. So,
well, simply put, it can be a challenge. I've been really blessed during my 25 plus years in ministry. I've often been the second man. The titles may have been different, but they've all fallen under that staff role. I've served as a youth pastor, family pastor, worship pastor, church growth minister, and an associate pastor. But I've also had the opportunity and the privilege of serving in the lead role as a church planter and pastor. But most of my time has been working with godly lead pastors. And I think about them. Over the years, I've worked with Henry Horton, Brad Hoshaw, David Pickard, Ronnie Chesser, Ron Fields, Wade Allen, and Kirk Shelton. And all of these men have added to my understanding of God's work and been a real blessing to me. Not everyone has had a similar experience, though. Sometimes working with your pastor can be one of the hardest things that you do. It's vital that you strive for success, or quote-unquote success, in your working relationship. If there's tension, it's going to stand in the way of God's blessing in your ministry setting. So how do we put those things in motion to be successful? How do we make that happen? Today, I've got 5 things that we're going to kind of work through and walk through together that I think are beneficial as we try to build that relationship. And in turn, it'll bless our church. It'll be beneficial to our ministry as well as our lead pastor. So it's just important that we take some time with this and really work on it. Because you can be, if you're full-time, this really impacts you because this is the guy that you're working with all the time. But if you're a volunteer, that's who you're working with. And you may have a different idea, a different ministry philosophy, and you need to figure out how this is going to work together. So the first thing that I have is understand your pastor's position. Your lead pastor has been placed in his role for a purpose. He's God's man on the scene. He is the under shepherd following God's leadership to feed, protect, and guide God's people. He'll stand before the Father and answer for how he pastored his flock. You may not like the decisions that he makes, but that doesn't change the fact that he is the leader. Now, if you're serving as a staff member, your primary role is to help fulfill the vision and mission of the church, which is led by the pastor. It isn't about your agenda. You don't need to lead your areas of responsibility in a way that contradicts your lead pastor. It's better for you to step out of the way than to head down a road that will only hurt the church in the process. If we insist on charging down that path, it will only hurt our families and our reputation. We must remember our place of service. And let me stress that this isn't about knowing our place, but it's about understanding our role. Our role is to help support that pastoral ministry. We may be a pastor. That may be God has placed that calling on our life, and we are pastoring the students. We're pastoring a part of the congregation. But many are part-time. They're working as a volunteer. We need to understand that this is a support role. Now, one of the things that I would ask you guys is, what do you do when you get to that place where you realize you understand the pastoral role, but you don't feel like you can stay where you're at? You feel like it's best to get out of the way. How do you handle that? I mean, I know that's a tough question, but what are some quick things to do in that place?
Could you ask me that question in a different way, Dan? I may try to approach it from somewhere different. Give me a different perspective of what you're
Sure.
Give me some.
Sure. There are times when we realize that we can't, whether it is in because of a differing ministry philosophy, that we have to step out of the way, that it's best for the church that we do that. We understand the pastor's position and his role within the church, and we realize that I'm going to keep bumping heads with him because of this. And I know this is a hard thing to start with in our conversation, but what do we do at that point?
Oh man, yeah.
Do we
I have
just
some experience
immediately resign? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of prayer, and I mean, of course,
Okay.
the disciplines, but as I've had this happen, just being transparent, this has happened twice in the 6 different churches that I've been a part of, and and before I get to my answer, Dan, if I could expound for just a second, kind of, I don't want people to think I'm some crazy divisive lunatic or something, but because I'm not. I love every chance to serve God is an amazing opportunity, and I take it seriously, and but I think there needs to be kind of a vetting process before we even step into a role that's a support role. I think there needs to be a larger interview process for all of us, that instead of just saying, the months that it takes to interview one person, over 3 to 6 months, there could be 2 to 3 interviews where the church only really hears you preach or hears your heart, and then that's it. And then they want you, but they don't even know who you are. They don't even know your personality type, or the ox poo, as it's been referenced before in the Old Testament. Many blessing comes from the ox. It produces a lot of fruit, but in the manger there's going to be ox poo. And so it's good to have a worker work in the field, but you got to know, I guess, what that poo looks like for all of us, what that struggle is for all of us, and so I think there needs to be a better vetting process for all of us preachers and pastors, and for our leadership, senior leadership. If you're listening, that's we need to have a really good, clear, long interview dating relationship before we bring people on. I just think that would help a lot of those younger guys. So now my answer, prayer. When you start noticing differences of opinion, I think a lot of younger people are tempted, as I have been tempted to think often about the pessimistic side of a person rather than the redeeming qualities of a person. And so I immediately I'm gonna start praying, and I'm asking God why these things exist, if it's tension, and if it's something that's a divisive thing within me, or is it something. So I also start seeking counsel. It's the second thing I do, is seeking counsel on some things. And I don't really reference people. I'll reference openly to some friends of mine. I'll say, man, I'm struggling with this philosophy that I am seeing. What do you think about it? Instead of having a position, I'll ask my friends. And Dan, you've been one of those people before. And Chris, I imagine you'll be one of those people for me, one of these days, surely. But when those philosophies come up and those differences of opinion, I try to find that counsel. And then thirdly, I try to, as I've sought counsel, I've prayed and I've gone to the Word, and I try to see if I can handle this forever. if this is something that I can deal with forever, and if it's something that it's worth struggling in this way, or this having this tension in this way, if it's worth it, if I can keep a good working spirit, and keep my heart submissive to God, or if this is something that I won't sleep at night, and because I have my family and my health, and also the church's health and his health, and I just want to say this before I go on, but guys, I never think it's a good idea to just leave a church because of differences of opinion. I never think that's good. I don't think you'll ever learn to work in a cohesive environment with other people and learn to play well with others if you keep doing that. I think when you join a church, it's your family. It's not you're not working there. It's a job for sure, and it's a career, and it's a great opportunity, or even if it's part-time or volunteer, but that's your family. And we need to treat it as such. And so we can't just have somebody just kick them out because they're doing wrong. So, and then to close with my kind of some of my thoughts, as I want to try to, pray for my pastor, pray for the situation. And if I do feel that I can't continue, then I will take, typically I'll talk with, I will have approached already the pastor and told him some concerns that I've had. And that's kind of my final deal in the process. At that point, if it's received well, and there's an openness to talk about it and to deal with it, then I am immediately like, okay, this can work, and let's restore all the relationships and just have an all around good attitude, and let's just talk about it and work on our communication. And but if it's not received well, then I will probably tell him within a couple weeks or months that I'm probably going to look somewhere else, and I'm not angry, and because I don't want to. You don't want to do anything out of anger, right, guys?
Right.
You just don't, and but if it's for your spirit and for the spirit of others and for the protection of the church, like I have resigned before just to protect the church alone. I've discipled my replacement, and then I saw that God was moving in a direction with the leadership that I was no longer a part of in that plan. So I left quietly, and it was a wonderful thing. Some students stepped up and started teaching, and it was wonderful. Several surrendered to ministry under that guy, and he's now, student pastor in a bigger context. It's wonderful, and I think just those are kind of some thoughts I had, I guess, towards achieving unification either way.
Yeah. Well, we have to start with that understanding of the pastor's position, and then, as Mike has shared, what do you do when you hit an impasse, or you feel like you have to figure out what's next? So kind of going back to our list, understanding your pastor's position. Number 2, pray for your pastor. And that's one of the things that Micah mentioned. Your pastor may be your best friend or may be pretty far down on your list. Either way, you should be praying for him on a daily basis as he seeks to dive into God's word in preparation to preach and as he serves the body. Not only will prayer undergird his work, it's going to soften your heart as well in that process. If there's a struggle between the two of you, speaking to God about him will open your heart to understanding. Now, in addition, you need to pray for your pastor as an example to your students and to others in the body. They need to know that you're praying for him. So, gentlemen, what are some specific things that we can pray for our pastor about? What are those things that you might lift before the Lord about your pastor? Chris?
I think when we do the first thing that you said, when we really understand and we've thought hard about all that goes into being the lead pastor of the church, no matter the size of the church, to know that he has been positioned in a place to be the shepherd of people in that sense, with Christ obviously being the head, then that brings a lot of things to mind about just different pressures that he faces, and that come to him in just on a regular basis. And so I think it's important to pray for his spiritual health and also for his physical health. I believe, like in another episode that we've talked about, that idea of self-care. I think it's really important that we pray for our pastor in that way. That may sound not as spiritual as something else, but But I think it's very, very important that that we pray that that he would be someone who is taking care of himself physically, and that the Lord would allow that to be something that he takes seriously, and but more importantly that he would be someone who's not just standing up preaching once a week, but that he would be someone who is constantly growing in his own faith, and to be actively looking for ways that we can help support him in that, in a very complimentary way, not in a condescending one. I think it's important that we pray for his family, um, depending on just the situation, whether it be he and his wife, or if he has kids. Or I think we need to pray specifically for his leadership over his family, and just for the different dynamics that come in that situation. And I think it's important also that we pray that the Lord would open our heart to just be aware of different ways that we can help lighten his burden, and to know that we've each been called to a particular ministry context, and that we are working together for the Lord in that church, and serving alongside one another. And so to be open for the different ways that we can bear one another's burdens in that sense.
That's good. That's good, Chris. Well, let's go ahead and look at number 3. Number 3 on our list is we need to communicate with our pastor. One of the best things that you can do for your pastor is to simply keep him informed. I had a pastor in one of my churches, and he gave me great freedom in the ministry. The one thing he wanted the entire time was to know what was happening. So that way, as church members would come to him and ask questions, as they would know what's happening. Plus, he could also keep me from doing something stupid in the process. He just wanted to know what was going on. And so, Chris, I know that you are in a ministry context. You have a lead pastor there. How do you and Cliff Johnson, your pastor, communicate during the course of the week or during the month? What does that look like at Garrett Memorial Baptist Church?
Yeah, we have a weekly staff meeting where we get to, talk about all the different particulars of ministry, of just what's going on in our church, what we want to happen, what we need to adjust, that kind of stuff. And so that happens on a regular. He and I mean, we are friends, and I'm thankful for that, very thankful for that. And so we have random lunches. He and I, we had lunch today. We don't schedule those lunches, but we just randomly will get together and have lunch. Some weeks it's 2 to 3 times a week. Other times it might be one or none, but that happens, where we get to just kind of let our hair down and have a good time together that way. One thing I really enjoy about Cliff is he's very open to just me walking into his office, which I have to be mindful of. Today I had a lot of coffee, and I feel like I really talked his ear off more than usual. So, of course, I blame that on the coffee. But he's really good about just bringing me into the conversation of what he's studying for preparation for Sunday, for preaching, and asking my opinion. And I've always enjoyed. I just enjoy talking about the scripture with him, and so we have a good conversation that way. And then it hasn't happened recently because some of our schedules have changed, but for a long time he and I worked out together in the CrossFit gym, and so that was a place that we were able to connect, and that just offered another type of conversation that would keep going each day as we saw each other. So those are just the different ways that he and I interact with other. I mean, there's a lot of others I could probably say, but I'd say those are the ones that I appreciate the most.
The one of the things that I would encourage you, if you're listening and you're thinking about, okay, what am I teaching with my students? Those are things that you need to communicate to your pastor. You need to stay on the same page. You want the church to go in one direction rather than just a whole bunch of different directions. And so as much as possible, I encourage you guys to be teaching from the same book, or be teaching a similar topics that your pastor is leading the congregation in. so that you're all on that same page. But that needs to be a part of that communication and that's going on, talking about what you're teaching. You need him to speak into it. And if you're praying together about the direction of the church is, then you're seeing things, and he needs to know that as well. Well, number 4 on our list is that we should connect with your pastor. Take your pastor to lunch or out for coffee. That's some of the stuff that Chris was talking about. Go work out with him if you have that opportunity. It's important that as a staff that you have a genuine relationship. Now, you may not have much in common. There may be a huge generation gap. That's one of the things that we talked about already. But you can always work at building that connection, making it stronger, finding some common ground. If nothing else, you love your church, you love the people in that church. Let's gather around that. Micah, I know that you love to connect with others. So what are some ways that you might suggest connecting with your lead pastor?
With Kerry Condrey, one of the first ministry pastors I worked with, he discipled me. He was the discipler of disciplers, man. I mean, he taught me how to be as a husband, like what to do after dinner, how to conduct myself, like if Rachel cooked, and he just taught me all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that we did, awesome. I mean, it was awesome. And he just taught me the nuts and bolts, and didn't like say, "Hey, sit down, let me teach you," which I appreciate and love that, of course. But he just did it in such a natural way that it didn't seem forced. It was like it was, our plan. It just he just taught me stuff as he would invite me and Rachel over to him and his wife and his 4 kids' house, under 5. It was crazy. But he would teach us, like, just by his actions. He'd be talking to us, and Paige would finish, cooking dinner, and she'd sit down, and she'd just kind of take a deep breath and go, "How are you, Rachel?" And then I would look over, and Carrie would be cleaning up after we'd already eaten. I mean, just absolutely taking everything and just putting it in boxes. And so I'd go over and help Carrie. And so anyways, the way we connected really besides that was playing basketball. I mean, guys, I think both of you know how to play basketball, right? Chris?
Yeah, I know a lot about basketball.
You didn't technically answer my question. You dodged it. Should I press the issue a little? Can you play?
No, you don't want to play me.
Oh, good. All right, it'll be competitive. That's what I'm talking about. Dan, do you play?
I have. I actually played a little church league. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad.
Man, I love to play basketball.
My skills are in other areas. So
I love to play basketball. And I did everything in high school, just played a lot of sports. And so Carrie knew that. And so we'd play basketball together, 2 times a week. And another thing Carrie and I did was we ate food together. We ate in together. It was just us 2 on staff, so kind of a small nucleus. But we all loved each other. My wife, probably one of the only ladies my wife has truly that has just poured into my wife was definitely Paige Condrey. I mean, she probably in a lot of ways saved and helped our marriage in so many ways with how Rachel and I talked to each other, and not because of me, but just how she taught Rachel. And but we'd go to the movies together, and one night Carrie and I would go to a movie, and the girls would stay and watch the kids, and the next week, or next 2 weeks, we would watch the kids, and they would go to a movie. It's just this awesome recurring, organic relationship building. And so, playing basketball, fast forwarding, Bobby Harrell, at a larger church in Fort Worth, he really enjoyed running. And he was busy because it was a larger staff. So I would try to catch up with him on Twitter and find where he was, and then just start running beside him. And also those office, Chris, you mentioned those office visits. That was a way I walk in, and I knew that he had so much on his plate, and I'd say, "Hey, I just need just about 5 minutes," and it always turned into like what felt like an hour, because he would just sit and just tell me stuff, story after story of a question that I had and answering it and stuff. And, fast forwarding to Daniel Williams at First Damascus, basketball again. Like, we just loved ministry. We loved God. And I'd go into his office and talk with him. But he also liked RC planes. And so he'd fly those sometimes. And, where our people were, him and I were at basketball games. And so we just did a lot of stuff together. And even Gary Lambright and I, we were just big into solving problems. When it came down to big stuff in the church, he'd invite me over, and he would just he'd mention an issue, and we would just sit there and just kind of talk about it, talk through it. And Of course, sports. That was we'd watch sports, which I'm not a big sports watcher. I'm a bit more into playing them, but I sat there. We just hang out and watch Last Man Standing. That was big. We'd work on his boat or go fishing, or just there's a lot of different ways. We eat food. That's a big one. Those are just kind of some things that we've done over the years. So again, I told y'all before, both you and Dan and Chris, that whatever people are doing, I want to do. And so whatever the pastor does, whenever he takes off during the week, I take off and kind of follow his lead in that. And man, it's just been fruitful. It's been awesome watching some of those relationships grow.
That's one of the things that you said right there, is that when you take off, the pastor takes off, you would take off. Some of the best times that I've had with these men of God that I've served with is they've just taken me along with them. And so whether it was to an association meeting and they wanted to introduce me to people, or I remember Brad Hoshaw, when I was just a college guy finishing up at CBC, he would just take me places with him. I'd go to the printing shop, or I'd go to the camera shop with him, or, and he would invest his life in me. So, sometimes we have to be intentional in that. Like Micah, you mentioned tracking a pastor down, seeing where he was on Twitter. But sometimes it is much more organic, and I wish it would always be that way, but it's not. But man, when you really connect with your pastor, the last thing that we're looking at becomes super easy. We need to publicly support our pastor. As a staff member, you need to be your pastor's biggest supporter. If the church is doing something to honor him, you should be the one out front saying, he is so deserving of this, let's give. You may not always feel like being that voice, but the church needs the unity that this represents. If it's a ministry direction, jump on board. Let others see your excitement, and they're going to join in. Now, you may have to set your own wants and desires aside, and that means taking on the humility that Jesus exemplified. So we want to make much of our pastors. So what are some ways that you have honored your pastors in the past?
This is one of those things where, we can appreciate them publicly and we can appreciate them privately. In this context, you asked publicly, I think. And, there are times where Cliff and his family may be out of town. They may be on vacation or something like that. And I try to work a point into my sermon, maybe at the beginning before we get started, just to remind our people of how thankful I am for him and how they should be too, and just to take a minute to remind our church the gift that we have with Cliff as our pastor. And so taking time like that to just publicly acknowledge who he is and what God has given us in him.
That's awesome, man. That's really awesome. I think one thing I try to do, and I've tried to do, even with the disagreements, I could wrestle and stay up sometimes at night with just some things I just was wrestling with, and why we do what we do, and people would, it seems like people would at that time would come to my office. Did you guys find that true sometimes? Like, it's so weird. Like, in the times where and I don't mean like divisive, or I just mean when you're just wrestling with something that was said or done, and you're just like, and you're just kind of, you don't say anything, even to your wife, you don't say anything, and because I think that's important, dividing that, so because she needs him to see him as pastor too. But you kind of go, what was that about? And you're waiting to kind of just bring it up because of the hard nature of what he's going to do after a sermon or after something happens, and maybe he made a mistake or whatever, and you want to give room for that. But it always seems like somebody shows up and is like, hey, did you hear this? And I'm like, I don't think he meant it that way, but if you have any concern, you can go talk to him about it, but but again, you feel like you're in a way you're like making things harder on him. But I try to always point people to him and stand up for him even when he's not around, and and even if I'm wrestling with the very thing that they're mentioning, him and I can deal with that in private quarters and talk about, what he meant. And typically each pastor I've worked for when they've had those moments, have always graciously gone up and said, hey, the next week or next couple weeks, and said, hey, when I just want to clear something real quick, and they'll clear it up, And I just think it's very important to try to be a herald for them, because it isn't an easy job, And hey, student workers, the jobs y'all work, and it's not meaningless, and it's very meaningful, and but the pastor is trying to fight your battles as well. And so I think it's gracious if we just try to return that back and fight battles. And I don't want to say for them, like we should be fighting like their battles for them, but to go to battle for them in a way to encourage and speak solid biblical truth, and give unity in those moments. Keep your heart unified and consecrated before God, because I think that's when, the devil's playground. I think that's when those divisive thoughts and things can pop up for sure.
Mm-hmm. It is, well, working with your pastor is not always easy, but if a staff member or volunteer is working well with the lead pastor, God is going to do some exciting things. And being that person that stands up for your pastor, being that one that honors them, that is just powerful. We have to ask our question: have you been intentional as you've worked with your pastor? Have you made an effort to honor him and to follow his leadership? When we submit to the authorities in our lives and truly partner together for the gospel, Jesus can bring about real success in our ministries. Well, on behalf of all of us at Student Ministry Matters, thanks for being with us today. We hope that you'll continue to join us as we seek to connect with other student ministry workers. Let me encourage you to keep serving, because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students, because the work matters.